Let's move closer to home. Alys, Burnham is announcing plans to give mayors more financial powers. I'm sure you've been reading and writing about this in what they say is the biggest transfer of power from Westminster in a generation. The Prime Minister is saying that the aim is to give local leaders more control over investment, transport, housing, but some Reform and Conservative mayors have been saying that they will use the money for tax rebates, I should say, instead. And Ben Houchin has been talking about this. Louise Haigh, First Secretary of State, spoke to Times Radio Breakfast.
Well, look, mayors have the ability to spend the money almost as they want now, especially in advanced mayoral authorities like the Tees Valley. To my knowledge, it's not in their gift to set income tax or business rates. So we would anticipate that the money would be invested into public services and into growth schemes that benefit the community as a whole.
Alys, what do you make of this this suggestion and the idea? Some people saying, but we don't have a mayor, what do we do?
Yeah, I think this whole devolution agenda is going to run into quite a lot of trouble. It's not devolving powers to mayors if you say, if you're dictating how they use it, right? If you're saying, OK, well, you can only spend it, you can't give it back to people. That's just diktat from Westminster, isn't it? I think Andy Burnham's not going to like having to devolve power in certain places to right-wing people. And I think the other problem with devolution, well, I don't think it's anything that people get out of bed to vote for in England. And B, I think it's going to produce, inevitably, regional inequality, which is something Andy Burnham says he's against. So I think this whole agenda is just going to kind of run into a bit of a brick wall. It's quite technocratic, it's quite boring, and I think voters are going to get tired of it pretty quickly.
Do you think so? Do you think they'll just go, this is not, I'm not registering?
I mean, look, to be honest, we had multiple referendums on regional mayors and people rejected them. Lots of places don't want them.
Yeah. Why is that, Manveen? Why would somebody not want the mayor to come in and fix things? You know, like the sheriff coming into town.
I think in the past there's been a real credibility problem. So, you know, people tell you to vote for a mayor because it's a position that will really matter, but they haven't had the powers always, certainly not across the country in the same way they do in, say, London or Manchester, to make a difference. So I think it's really hard to get people to care, and that's partly why those votes didn't go through. I think there's also, you know, we sort of go through like this cycle where we suddenly think devolution is the thing that will fix all of our woes. And, you know, there are genuinely advantages to it. But one of the reasons we centralised a few decades ago was because devolution wasn't always working, and you had some councils and some sort of local authorities where, you know, you had corruption or you had just sort of inefficiencies, and Westminster at the time thought they could manage it better from the centre. So I think there's also sort of a bit of a lived memory of that. You know, I mean, Private Eye used to be full of pages about sort of corrupt mayors and local authorities, which has sort of fallen out of fashion recently. But for a certain generation, that's one of the reasons they're sort of quite dubious about the plan.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with devolution is who you're devolving to, right? And if an administration like a county council or something is the less prestigious elected office, then of course you're going to have lower quality people than you'll have in Westminster. And I think, you know, if you look at Scotland, for example, I don't think devolution has necessarily been great there. The standards are much lower. The SNP put up income tax and receipts actually went down. It's not very well governed.
Yes. How do you think the way he's announcing, he's a man in a hurry, isn't he? The last 10 days, I should say 10 weeks, 10 days thereabouts. Is this effective? Do you think, or do you think it looks a bit pick me?
It does seem to be quite effective if you look at Andy Burnham's polling. He seems to be being quite popular. It's certainly a very, very frenetic approach. He's good, you know, he's announcing a new thing every day, and the media is having to focus. You know, so today is devolution day, yesterday was social care day. But there's no detail and there's no scrutiny behind any of it. Parliament's not sitting, and it all actually, I mean, everything really is waiting for the budget. That's where that'll be the real test.
Well, as the King of the North will know, winter is coming, so it'll happen. Manveen, how do you feel it's going from a presentational and political point of view?
Presentationally, I think he's doing a great job, but it is, as Alys just said, it's all presentation. You know, even the devolution stuff today, we're told there will be strategic advisory councils, there will be more accountability. We don't know what any of those structures are. We don't really know exactly what powers will be devolved and what these, you know, sort of regional power centres will be able to do with the money that they now have, or if there are any limits on it, if any of that will be taken away from them and sent to sort of other parts of the country. You know, there's a lot of things that still to be sort of spelt out. So this, you know, we don't really know how this policy will go. What he's done brilliantly, though, is just win the headlines. Yeah. And I think it's a real reminder of how badly Keir Starmer did at that. You know, how there was just a void as soon as he got into number 10 that was then filled by sort of stories about expenses and how much his glasses had cost and what his wife was wearing. And I think that's something that Burnham has managed to avoid. And it does look very competent, but we just don't know what any of this stuff is.
I was reminded, sorry, Alys.
I was going to say, he's clearly proved, which is what everybody said about him, that he's a good communicator.
Yeah. I was reminded of poor old Keir Starmer came in saying, it's worse than that. You know, as an opener. You know, whereas he came in saying, look, you know, it mightn't feel good, but we're going to get there to the house on the hill, you know, the shining. So I suppose it's presentation and vibes. There's a terrible word to destroy your weekend, and it being only Friday. Okay, coming up, how big is Burnham's boat problem? And we're going to hear about the summer holiday divide. Lots more to discuss. First with me in studio is City AM's opinions and feature editor Alys Denby, and also on the line is host of the Times Story Podcast Manveen Rana. Let's keep moving and talk about immigration. It's been another deadly, desperate week in the Channel. More than 750 migrants crossing to the UK on Wednesday, the busiest day of the year so far. 4 people sadly dying attempting the journey. This, Manveen, is a big problem, the boat problem for Andy Burnham.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a huge problem for all politicians for a number of years now. You know, for us to have gone into the last election where every main party had to have one of their main 5 pledges on boats rather than, you know, on AI or climate change or anything that sort of feels quite existential, just shows how big an issue this is in terms of the mind of the British populace. This week has been particularly bad. I think also that we've got to put a bit of context into this, because the picture itself is changing. You know, the crossings are down 44% this year, which is a huge improvement. So although this has been a particularly bad week, it is probably worth sort of stepping back and just looking at what has worked.
Because we've been seeing the grid, haven't we, of announcements and cost of living and defence and social care and all big ticket issues, all very important issues, Alys, obviously, but not an awful lot of chatter about immigration. So what does that say? I mean, is it because it's such a hot potato politically, or is it because the priorities are just a little different?
I don't think foreign policy is particularly Andy Burnham's area of interest, and immigration. It's not something he's spoken about much, and I'm not sure he has a plan for it. If you see those images from Ceuta, there's not really any other way to describe that than an invasion.
Will you describe those images for our viewers and listeners who haven't seen it? Because I was watching it myself, and just in case they haven't. 50,000
people have come into this Spanish territory from Morocco. I mean, it's terrifying. It looks like something from a horror film, and those people will be making their way to France. So we do need to do something very serious about this. I think it will give people some confidence that Andy Burnham kept Siobhan and Mahmood in the Home Office, because as Manveen said, she's been quite effective in bringing this down. But I'm not sure that Andy Burnham's backbenchers are going to like it. If he has to do something like offshoring asylum applications, or even something similar to the Rwanda scheme, he's not going to be able to get that through.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Somebody was saying, Manveen, you can't TikTok your way out of this.
Yes, no, it has to, prove to be just such a challenging policy area. Alys mentioned the Rwanda scheme. There've been a number of schemes. It's like it's the graveyard of where policy careers. So that's where they go to die, because it's so hard to come up with something effective. This deal with the French seems to have had some effect. There is a report in the Times this morning that is showing just how patchy some of the coverage from the law enforcement services in France is along that very, very, very long coast, and how it's just changing behaviour. People are moving further and further south along the coast before they start a crossing, which actually just makes it more dangerous and more likely that they'll die on the way. But that's one policy area that seems to have made some difference. We don't know from Andy Burnham yet whether he wants to, augment that with something else. Will there be sort of a return to Rwanda-style schemes? Will there be some other deterrence? We've got to wait and see.
You think with I think you mentioned Alys, Shabana Mahmood staying in the Home Office. That seems like a good shout now, actually, and not putting her into number 11 under the circumstances, because she's kind of made her bed now in how she approaches this, and that might suit the Prime Minister.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, she's been effective, but she's not popular in her own party, and that's going to be a challenge for her. And we've seen how even with this huge majority, Labour's backbenchers can make enormous problems. I mean, they got rid of a Prime Minister. But I do think that, given, like I say, how dramatic these images from Ceuta are, there are going to be calls to really step up on this, because people are going to be afraid.
Yeah, okay. They're striking images, no doubt about it. Kemi Badenoch, meanwhile, facing criticism over her net zero stance. She's ruling out support for Conservative candidates who back the original 2050 target while insisting she is not a climate change denier. Can you do both, do you think, Alys?
I think you can absolutely do both. Look, I think Kemi Badenoch is right about this. I think climate change is clearly real. We can see that. We're living through it right now. But getting to net zero by a particular date makes absolutely no difference. It's not going to stop a wildfire. And she's right that we need to open up the North Sea for drilling. In fact, today we've just had BP pull out of the North Sea because of how difficult that environment has become. It's impossible to make profits because you keep getting windfall taxes. There's too much regulation. So I think she's right about this. I do think it's a bit mean of her not to have let Grant Shapps be selected as a candidate over this. I think he was famously the only man in Westminster who knew how to use a spreadsheet. And I think
but for wrong reasons. Yeah.
But perhaps Kemi Badenoch, being an engineer, thinks, well, I can use Excel, so I don't need him.
But it is interesting that when we look at the news and we look at what's happening in France and we look at what's happening with these kind of 40-degree summer weeks and weeks and months at a stretch, and part of you would think, we got to net zero this up, or you look at this story and say, well, not everyone agrees with that. I
think if everyone agrees that we need to get to net zero, I think it's having the arbitrary deadline that people disagree with. Look, green technology is a clear investment opportunity. It's the future. Everybody agrees with the goal. It's just how you get there. And if you get there just by importing everything from China and Russia and offshoring all your climate emissions, well, that doesn't help the climate at all.
Yeah, okay. And Manveen, where are you? Do you watch the news and bury your head in your hands, thinking the world is burning? We need to act more, or do you think we're doing the best we can?
I think it's hard not to be alarmed. I think a lot of the climate debate for years, it's been very alarmist from a lot of scientists. But, when they're talking about a change in 1 degree, it's very hard to bring the public with you. And I think what they haven't been able to communicate, nature sort of has this summer, I think has proved to a lot of people that this change is coming, and it's coming fast. You look at the wildfires across Europe, even in London, we've got sort of wildfires along sort of train tracks and houses being burnt down. And you think this is apocalyptic. This is completely mad. And I understand that there are huge costs to pursuing a net zero policy by a certain date, but we're now starting to see and understand that there are also costs to climate change that are starting to affect us all, whether it's a household cost of everyone now wondering whether they need to get aircon. What we don't know yet, we'll have to look back in a few months' time at what this has done to productivity. We know that transport hasn't always worked because of extreme weather. We've had the wildfires across so much of the country, across a lot of farmland. there is a huge cost to not doing something about this too. Yeah. And I sort of think, Kemi Badenoch did she sort of saw a political opportunity with this, and I think it really worked for her up until this summer. And I think now people are looking and thinking, actually, this feels very urgent. I think you've got to pursue it. And I think she's probably made a mistake in making it such an article of faith that you can't stand to be a Tory. You can't be selected as a candidate now if you don't sort of say that you have to step back from net zero, full stop, really. Let alone sort of by a particular date. There seems to be a real sort of fear of it, and I think that seems a bit bonkers. That would mean that people like Theresa May wouldn't be in the party right now, and I sort of think she's probably gone too far and doesn't quite know how to step back. So at the moment she's sort of pushing ahead, but I think it'll start costing her votes at some point soon. Do you think she could find herself and bring herself to at some point looking at the news and seeing around the world the wildfires and everything that goes with it, and think, I should reconsider my position on this, or that'd be just too much of a step back?
I don't think she will, because I think she's correct on her position on net zero. I think perhaps talking about it right now while France is on fire is not the best political timing. So perhaps a suggestion.
It doesn't look beautiful, yeah.
Look, perhaps that's a communications issue, but I think on the substance of the policy, I think she's right.
Yeah. Well, the communications are that the fires are burning.
Yeah.
It's more than communication. We're physically looking at this happening. So maybe it's more than just that. Yeah, there's no serious climate scientist that says you get to net zero without continuing to use fossil fuels during the transition. So she's right about the North Sea. Yeah. Shall we move on? Let's move on. Because we were talking about Diane Abbott, of course. She's been let back into the Labour. This is meant to be the silly season. I mean, for goodness sake, Alys, it's busier than ever before. Diane Abbott left back into the Labour Party under Andy Burnham following a year-long suspension. She was initially suspended in 2023 when she said Irish, Jewish and traveller people do not experience racism, but rather prejudice, which she likened to people with ginger hair. She was then reinstated a year later, but suspended again when she said she didn't regret her initial remarks. In a separate incident in July 2025, she also published a social media post in which she referred to the Israel Defence Forces as the Jewish Defence Forces. She later apologised for that. In a statement, a Labour spokesperson said Abbott had apologised following an independent process and that she would be readmitted into the parliamentary party, meaning she can sit as a Labour MP once again. Manveen Abbott, Diane Abbott, a significant figure on the left, of course. Is this part of Andy Burnham's new approach to end factionism? There's the word of the year, factionalism within Labour.
It certainly seems like that. That's what the optics are. I mean, they've also been very keen, though, to point out that this is the end of an independent process that they've gone through. So Andy Burnham won't have had any impact on that whatsoever. That has naturally come to an end now. She has apologised, and that's why she's in. But for him, I think it probably is, just in terms of presentation. I mean, I think there are huge question marks about the things she actually said and whether they want to be associated with that. If she is, I think she needs to make a very big song and dance about apologising. But in terms of the presentation for him, it's a distinct difference to Starmer. And for people within the Labour Party, this will feel like the end of the Morgan McSweeney era, that sort of moment where it felt like there was this sort of Politburo running number 10 who would sort of get rid of people within the party if they didn't like what they were saying without ever engaging in the debate. I think it does feel like it is a shift. And, she, for all of her, many problematic statements, she is sort of an emblematic figure in British politics. One of the first sort of black politicians of note. She's been a big beast on the political landscape for a while. So I think for a lot of people in Labour, it just sort of will feel like this is a return to a party they kind of recognise.
Have you any strong thoughts on Diane Abbott, Alys?
Yeah, look, I think two things can be true at the same time. Both that, as Manveen said, she was the first black female MP, and I think that she was treated quite poorly. But let's not forget that Andy Burnham has come to power as a result of a kind of factional struggle within the Labour Party. But the factional fight that Keir Starmer waged was to root out anti-Semitism. He was trying to purge Corbynites because he thought that they were making the party unelectable because of their anti-Jewish hatred. And so I think that welcoming Diane Abbott back into the fold is a signal that Andy Burnham's is not ending factionalism. He's just being far more tolerant of a faction that was toxic within the Labour Party.
So, of course, he'd argue that the apologies has been made. I accept that, and it's time to move on. I presume that's where he's coming from.
Yeah, I assume that's where he's coming from with Diane Abbott as an individual. But I'm saying the signal he's sending to that faction is that welcome back.
Yeah, Manveen, what do you think about that element as Alys has been outlining?
I think Keir Starmer did a big job of sort of turning the party around, of trying to get rid of the anti-Semitic sort of badge that the Corbyn era had earned. I think a lot of people at the centre of government now sort of feel like that's been done, and now they can sort of start, with a lot of those that, this isn't Corbyn coming back. This is sort of Diane Abbott, who's sort of been just kind of I think her suspension has been a sore point for so much of the party. This is more about bringing the party together, winning over sort of people who you've lost because they think you're doing everything you can to hang on to power rather than respecting values. And I think that's why the apology is so important, because Alys is right. You do not want to look like you are in any way allowing anti-Semitism back into the party. You've got to show that something has changed.